Have you ever felt overpowered by uncontrollable circumstances? Have you ever battled feelings of fear, rage, or future uncertainty? You're not by yourself if so. These difficulties are common to all people and have existed for thousands of years in human civilization. What if I told you that the Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men in the world, recorded his innermost thoughts about these very conflicts about 2,000 years ago? And what if those texts included ageless practical insight that may change the way you handle the difficulties in your own life today? This video focuses on how Marcus Aurelius's age-old wisdom can help you become more resilient, discover inner peace, and confront life's challenges with bravery and clarity. First, what exactly are the Meditations? Since the Meditations was never intended for general consumption, it is not a typical book. In his later years, especially when he was in charge of military expeditions, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius kept a personal journal consisting of 12 books of various lengths. The Meditations is a very introspective work, in contrast to formal philosophical treatises intended for discussion or education. It is primarily a compilation of ideas, reminders, and guidelines that Marcus penned to himself as a tool for introspection and self-improvement. The work's original Greek title, Ta eis hauton, which means to himself, sums up its intent quite well. Marcus was engaging in a type of philosophical journaling, applying Stoic concepts to manage the enormous difficulties of running an empire and navigating life's hardships, rather than writing for an audience or aiming for intellectual acclaim. His remarks served to remind him of the virtues he sought to exemplify, control his emotions, and strengthen his own moral discipline, the nature of the Meditations and their goal. It's critical to realize that, contrary to what the modern definition of the term Stoic might imply, Stoicism as practiced and documented by Marcus Aurelius does not include repressing feelings or being uncaring about life. Rather, Stoicism is a deep and all-encompassing philosophy that addresses morality, fortitude, and reason. It encourages people to accept what they cannot change, concentrate on what they can, and develop inner peace no matter what happens outside of them. Marcus frequently stresses in his works the value of remaining composed, being thankful, and leading a morally upright life. He reminds himself that he has no influence over outside forces, such as conflict, loss, criticism, or even death, and that his only real power is the way he chooses to react to them. This way of thinking, which is essential to Stoic philosophy, promotes composure and fortitude in the face of difficulty. Why Meditations are still important today? The Meditations was written by Marcus Aurelius almost 2,000 years ago, but its lessons are still incredibly applicable today. For advice on managing stress, keeping perspective, and developing resilience in both personal and professional life, people still consult his works. His observations provide ageless guidance on self-control, humility, and the transient nature of life, serving as a reminder that true happiness originates within and that no amount of money or influence can protect us from sorrow. Despite being one of the most powerful men in history, Marcus Aurelius recognized that true strength comes from virtue, wisdom, and inner serenity, rather than dominance or fortune. His works inspire us to have the same attitude, which enables us to face our own difficulties with patience, clarity, and purpose. The Meditations legacy. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius is one of the most influential and long-lasting philosophical works. Philosophers, statesmen, artists, soldiers, and regular people looking for courage and clarity in the face of hardship have all benefited from the knowledge, counsel, and consolation this extraordinary book has offered for almost 2 millennia. The Meditations is a profoundly personal and useful work, in contrast to abstract philosophical treatises intended for scholarly discussion. Marcus Aurelius composed it as a means of self-reflection and to remind himself of the values he wanted to live by, not for a readership. Even centuries after it was written, the text's potency and relatability can be attributed in part to its genuineness. Impact across the centuries. Numerous historical eras can be traced back to the influence of the Meditations, with Marcus's words gaining new significance and applicability in each. The Renaissance, a re-examination of Stoic knowledge. The Meditations was rediscovered and extensively disseminated among humanist intellectuals during the Renaissance, which saw a resurgence of interest in classical literature. Marcus Aurelius's emphasis on introspection, morality, and perseverance drew the attention of thinkers of the day, including Michel de Montaigne and Erasmus. Renaissance scholars who aimed to combine traditional knowledge with modern ideas found great resonance in the Stoic principles of reason, self-control, and moral integrity. The Founding Fathers and the American Revolution. Many of the founders of the American Revolution had their views greatly influenced by Stoic philosophy. The concepts presented in the Meditations had a profound impact on individuals including John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. For example, Washington valued the Stoic emphasis on restraint, responsibility, and tenacity. Many of the Stoic principles that Marcus Aurelius advocated are reflected in his capacity to withstand adversity throughout the Revolutionary War while maintaining a steady, moral leadership style. Jefferson, who possessed multiple copies of the Meditations, integrated Stoic ideas into his conception of civic duty and individual freedom. The 20th century, overcoming adversity with resilience. The Meditations has offered consolation and strength, even under the most trying conditions. Prisoners of War provide one of the most spectacular illustrations of its impact. Marcus's lessons on perseverance, acceptance, and preserving inner calm in the face of hardship have served as an inspiration to many who have survived imprisonment. It is said that Nelson Mandela was impacted by Stoic philosophy throughout his 27 years in prison. The Stoic focus on patience, dignity, and upholding one's moral integrity in the face of persecution resonated in his leadership style and approach to adversity, despite the fact that he drew inspiration from a variety of sources, including Christian and African traditions. Stockdale James, a U.S. Navy pilot who spent more than 7 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, attributed his survival to Stoicism, namely, the teachings of Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. He then wrote on how his perseverance was largely attributed to the Stoic idea of concentrating on what one can control, rather than complaining about what is out of one's control. A handbook for leaders, thinkers, and ordinary people on modern influence. The Meditation still has an impact on a large number of people today. Marcus Aurelius is consulted by athletes, creatives, business executives, and members of the armed forces. The book has become a mainstay in the movements for personal growth and self-improvement, and it is frequently brought up in conversations about emotional intelligence, mental toughness, and leadership. Through publications like The Obstacle is the Way and The Daily Stoic, authors like Ryan Holiday have popularized Stoic principles in the contemporary world and introduced Marcus Aurelius's wisdom to a new generation of readers. Stoicism is frequently cited by tech executives, investors, and entrepreneurs as a foundation for making logical choices under duress. Its tenets help athletes develop mental toughness and concentration. Its ageless guidance for handling stress, uncertainty, and adversity is consoling even for people who are not in leadership positions. The reasons behind the survival of Meditations. What accounts for the Meditations' enduring influence? Why does this book, which was written by a Roman emperor about 2,000 years ago, still serve as a source of inspiration and guidance for individuals from all walks of life? Its universality. We all confront the same difficulties that Marcus Aurelius did, overcoming hardship, managing emotions, behaving honorably, and finding serenity in a chaotic environment. His observations are incredibly relatable and real, irrespective of one's upbringing or era. Its applicability. The Meditations is a guide to life, not a philosophical theory. Marcus's counsel should not only be understood theoretically, but also put into practice. His advice can be immediately applied by readers to better their lives. Its humanity and honesty. Marcus Aurelius does not portray himself as a flawless sage who has fully understood the teachings of Stoicism. Rather, he writes as a human being with flaws, reminding himself of the values he finds difficult to uphold. Because of this vulnerability, the Meditations is incredibly approachable and personal. Marcus is not preaching from a position of superiority. Like everyone else, he is overcoming his own obstacles. Its emphasis on inner strength. One of the Meditation's most potent lessons is that, although we can't always control outside circumstances, we can influence how we react to them. People have found strength in the most trying situations because of this straightforward yet deep concept. The historical context of the Meditations. The historical context in which Marcus Aurelius wrote The Meditations must be taken into account in order to completely understand it. His thoughts were written during a period of great upheaval, uncertainty, and adversity rather than during a period of calm or pleasure. During his rule, internal political conflicts, epidemics, wars, and the ongoing demands of leadership plagued the Roman Empire. Marcus Aurelius used Stoic philosophy to keep his integrity, poise, and sense of purpose in the face of these tremendous challenges. Knowing this background enhances our enjoyment of the Meditations and brings to light the author's remarkable fortitude and moral integrity. The devastating crisis of the Antonine Plague. The Antonine Plague, a fatal disease that ravaged the Roman Empire from 165 to 180 CE, was one of Marcus Aurelius's biggest obstacles. Estimates indicate that up to 5 million people were murdered by this pandemic, which was thought to have been either smallpox or measles. The illness quickly spread throughout the empire, causing widespread fear and instability, damaging the economy and weakening the military. Marcus did not back down from this issue in his capacity as emperor. Unlike kings who would have fled to secluded palaces for protection, he remained engaged in governing, working ceaselessly to lessen the impacts of the tragedy. He supported relief efforts, handled resources, and made difficult decisions to keep the empire working. Despite his attempts, the epidemic took a devastating toll, presumably claiming the life of his co-emperor and adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, and finally, Marcus himself in 180 CE. Without a doubt, his thoughts in the Meditations were influenced by the death and suffering that surrounded him. His writings are replete with reminders of the fleeting nature of existence, the certainty of suffering, and the significance of upholding moral principles in the face of adversity. He was able to accept the frailty of human existence without becoming hopeless, thanks to his Stoic perspective. As he put it, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Marcus saw the ever-present threat of death as an opportunity to live sensibly and morally in the here and now, rather than as cause for anxiety. Continuous combat, a life on the front line. Near constant warfare was another characteristic of Marcus Aurelius's rule. He spent a large portion of his later years commanding Rome's legions in bloody battles against Germanic tribes like the Marcomanni and Quadi along the northern frontier. Rome's dominance in Europe was in danger of being undermined by outside forces, so these wars were required to protect the empire's borders. Marcus frequently walked with his soldiers, sharing their difficult circumstances in contrast to many emperors who gave generals command of the armed forces. The majority of his thoughts in the Meditations were composed in the midst of the hardships of war, in military encampments. The reality that influenced his ideas were the cold, the fatigue, and the constant threat of death. Marcus concentrated on upholding a sense of responsibility, reason, and justice rather than giving in to resentment or pursuing revenge. He consistently reminded himself to avoid becoming overwhelmed by rage or hatred, to treat everyone with decency, and to stay fair in his judgments. The notion that outside forces such as war, pain, or treachery are out of our control was one of his most important teachings. How we react to them is what really counts. As he put it, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He was able to maintain his moral compass despite the immense pressures of leading an empire during a time of war, thanks to this way of thinking. Challenges in politics and betrayals. Despite being regarded as one of Rome's greatest philosopher kings, Marcus Aurelius had political difficulties during his rule. Rivalries, corruption, and internal conflicts characterized the Roman Empire, which was a huge and intricate organization. Marcus had to deal with political intrigue and betrayals even from inside his own ranks. He occasionally had to make tough choices that required striking a balance between mercy and realism. He was not naive about the realities of power, yet he consistently sought to govern with wisdom and justice. His writings demonstrate his resolve to uphold his morals in the face of ambition and avarice. He also suffered personal losses, including the deaths of several of his children and his adored wife Faustina. Despite these catastrophes, he continued to reign with a steady hand, motivated by the notion that virtue, not personal satisfaction, was the highest objective of life. A philosophy developed through adversity. When we contemplate the trials Marcus Aurelius suffered, the Meditations takes on an even deeper relevance. These were not abstract philosophical reflections expressed from a place of ease and distance. They were the intensely personal reflections of a man enduring unremitting adversity. He did not write about resilience from a point of ease. He wrote about it while experiencing great personal and public hardships. He did not write about leadership from an ivory tower. He wrote while carrying the crushing weight of an empire in crisis. He did not write about death as a theoretical abstraction. He wrote while surrounded by sickness, war, and loss. Nevertheless, he remained true to his Stoic beliefs throughout it all. His works highlight the value of self-control, responsibility, and perspective, elements that enabled him to persevere through unspeakable adversity without losing his sense of direction. How to interpret the Meditations. You're about to go off on a trip into one of the most profound and timeless works of philosophy. If you are motivated to study the Meditations directly, the Meditations is a very intimate compilation of ideas, reflections, and reminders that Marcus Aurelius penned for himself, in contrast to conventional works having a distinct narrative structure. Because of this, reading it calls for a different strategy than reading other historical or philosophical texts. Here are some essential recommendations to help you interact with this outstanding work in a way that is both enriching and meaningful. A nonlinear approach to reading. It's important to recognize right away that the Meditations is not a formal philosophical book. It does not offer an argument in a linear form or in chronological sequence. Rather, it is divided into 12 books, each of which includes moral observations, reminders, and introspective thoughts. As a result, unlike a traditional book, you are not required to read the Meditations from start to finish. Any page can be opened to reveal insight that resonates with you at that particular time, in order to let Marcus's words meet them where they are in their own life. Many readers like to turn the pages at random. It should not be viewed as a book that needs to be read in one sitting, but rather as a guide that you can use often. 2. Read carefully and slowly. This book, The Meditations, is not meant to be read fast. Its thoughts are intended to be carefully considered rather than quickly perused, and its wisdom is profound. You can think about each concept and how it relates to your life by reading a few sections at a time. Since Marcus composed this work as a type of personal diary, he regularly repeats ideas, reaffirms principles, and examines similar issues from new angles. This repetition is not a weakness. Rather, it is an example of the Stoic technique of reinforcement, which involves repeatedly reminding oneself of important ideas in order to internalize them. Instead of rushing over a part that seems familiar, use it as a chance to get a deeper knowledge. Some readers find that reading a piece in the morning helps them remember its significance throughout the day. They then revisit it in quiet times to consider how it relates to their problems, ideas, and behaviors. Maintain a personal journal in addition to your reading. Doing the same kind of introspection that Marcus Aurelius did is one of the most effective ways to interact with the Meditations. Think about writing down your views about the passages that really speak to you in a journal. Write about anything that resonates with you, whether it be a line or a concept. Consider this. What relevance does this have to my life? Have I come across a circumstance where I may have benefited from this wisdom? What modifications may I make based on this insight? This act of writing not only increases your understanding, but also helps to integrate Stoic ideals into your daily life. Over time, you may find that your notebook becomes a personal meditation of its own, a place where you build wisdom, self-awareness, and resilience. Have patience with yourself. In principle, many of the concepts in the Meditations are straightforward, but in practice, they are challenging. It takes time and effort to fully embrace the discipline, perspective, and inner calm that Stoicism teaches. Even Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome and a devoted follower of Stoicism, found it difficult to apply these teachings. He knew that living by these ideals was a constant struggle, so he created the Meditations to remind himself of what he wanted to achieve. Certain ideas might not make sense right away. In the heat of everyday life, others could be challenging to implement. This is quite typical. Philosophy is meant to be lived, not only grasped academically, and growth is a slow process. Recognize that genuine wisdom is developed over a lifetime, and treat yourself with the same grace and patience that Marcus showed himself. 5. Reread the Meditations numerous times. The fact that the Meditations provides various insights at various stages of life is one of its amazing features. When read during a trying time, A passage that would have looked insignificant on one reading could suddenly feel significant. Our interpretation of the text evolves along with us. Many readers return to the Meditations on a regular basis. Some keep it by their bedside for daily motivation, while others revisit it annually. It can provide fresh advice with every interaction, much like a reliable mentor. As our investigation draws to a close, I want to get back to the original query. How can meditations transform your life? The solution is found in living out Marcus's values every day, not just in reading his words. You can create the conditions for a life that is more resilient, purposeful, and peaceful by concentrating on what you can manage, accepting that life is temporary, keeping a wider perspective, being present in every moment, analyzing your perceptions, and prioritizing virtue. Marcus Aurelius speaks remarkably clearly to our contemporary situation in many respects. His unwavering wisdom provides a fulcrum in a time of distraction, uncertainty, and fast change. His remarks serve as a reminder that, in spite of the enormous contrast between ancient Rome and the modern world, the basic difficulties of being human are remarkably universal. When you wake up in the morning, consider what a priceless privilege it is to be alive. To breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love is the last thing I'll share with you from the Emperor himself. I appreciate you coming along with me as we explore one of the most important collections of useful advice in history. I hope that, like innumerable others over the ages, philosophy will give you strength till the next time.